So it's Friday, time to sit back, relax and open a good business book. Tonight we're speaking to the author of Relentlessly Relevant, 50 Ways to Innovate, Douglas Kruger. Kruger is exploring how companies can innovate and become industry leaders, whether they're small or large. He joins us in studio now. Welcome to you.
Thanks so much, Francis.
So innovation has become a bit of a cheap word, used, bandied about like disruption. What does it mean?
Well, it has, and you're quite right. The thing to say these days is that we are innovative, and there's often nothing backing it up. What people tend to struggle with, and brands struggle with, is the how-to of innovation. And really, in many cases, it's quite simple. They're just different patterns of thinking and different questions that need to be asked. But we need to understand where those starting points are, rather than simply using it as marketing hype.
Unlike disruption, it doesn't have to be a fundamental turnaround. It can be something incremental, and you seem to be pointing out that this has to respond to what customers want.
Quite right. And also it doesn't have to be expensive. You know, when we think innovation, the first thoughts that tend to spring to mind for most people are expense, apps and technology. And in fact, in most cases, innovation really is just about asking a different question. A very simple example, Virgin Atlantic recently launched an innovation in South Africa where the radio ad simply said, don't you hate the fact that you have to pay for your plane tickets in full before you can apply for your visa? They then announced that they were an airline that would fully refund your air tickets if you don't get the visa. Now that's an innovation just by looking at the pain that customers feel in dealing with them. It took no money, just took asking the right question.
So that just makes your life simpler.
Absolutely.
There are these horror stories. Let's talk about big companies now. One I heard about a massive plane was built. Nobody realized that it wouldn't land on most runways in the world, though. And it seems like you're enforcing this philosophy that you should do incremental changes that can be tested before you kind of throw all your eggs into one basket.
Yes,
just
absolutely.
Tell me about that.
And in fact, what I've tried to do in the book is to give 50 different ways to innovate. I feel that often the theories around innovation run the danger of an either work or do not work scenario. So what I've tried to do is say, here are 50 different ways of accessing this complex ball of twine that we call innovation. Here are 50 different levers. Some will work in some industries, others will work for, in different scenarios. And I paint the pictures about which kinds of organizations should try which patterns of thinking.
So you're a small business. Could you say this should relate to very small businesses on the side of the road? What are the options that they have? Give me a few.
Well, it runs the gambit of thinking, but let me share with you one principle that would work as well for, say, a mom and pop store as it would for a large multinational. I have a principle, an exercise that I call burn down the building. And the basic concept is, take the infrastructure which you're using to deliver the service that you deliver to your customers. Take it out of the equation and challenge yourself to answer the question, how could you provide the same service without any of the previous infrastructure? Now what this does is it forces you to be a little bit creative about how you do what you do. And perhaps even more valuable than that, it forces you to see threats. Because we tend to get stuck in the way we do a certain thing. If someone else looks at it and says, well, I can see a cheaper way of doing that, that's a massive threat to our business. But by doing the burn down the business building exercise, we tend to see our way around that.
Well, how could this help? This may be a curveball for you, but how could this help big banks who are facing that threat?
Absolutely.
From retailers, everybody can now offer banking services because it's so cheap on the internet. How can they use these strategies to look at something that's fundamental to their business?
Well, I would say the bigger threat to what I call, not necessarily banks specifically, but the old dinosaurs, which is any company that plays on the idea of legacy, is a finding from 2014, so it's very recent, and I call it the meteorite strike that no one noticed. The outcome of this finding is that South African consumers no longer care about legacy. In fact, in many instances, they associate it with negative things like being outdated or being a part of the apartheid system. And what we are responding to now is, how are you innovating into my world? So in terms of your marketing output and your messaging, if you're playing on the idea of legacy, you are doing it 180 degrees wrong. We actually need to be talking about how to innovate into people's lives today. And that's very different thinking for, as you say, the big banks or any large company in South Africa.
So those ads like Volkswagen with the old first Mini, they're cute, but
They're
But
cute,
no,
but they're
people are
not
no
hitting
longer
the mark.
responding to
There
that.
are a couple of exceptions to this. It was a Yellowwood survey that found that among some of the brands, like say an Omar Rusks, they can get away with it. But anything to do with technology, services, retail sales, they simply can't anymore. The more pressing question is, how are you innovating into my world today? And that's what our retailers, our consumers care about.
Is there not still that nostalgia? I was with a group speaking to consumers in Alexandra Township, and one lady, what she said struck me. She said, I'm with Capitec Bank because it's cheaper now, but I would always want to go back to Standard if I could. There was kind of this family history. Or will that eventually fade away?
Well, the interesting thing is that she is, in fact, as you say, with Capitec Bank. So even though there is the sentimental attachment to a big brand, it's not translating into business for the big brand. One interesting contradiction to that, I have quite a fair amount of input in the book from the head of BMW South Africa. And I posed the question to him, how did you come out as a top brand in South Africa, given that you are almost 100 years old? They're essentially a legacy brand. And he says the clue is in the tagline, sheer driving pleasure. It doesn't reference themselves. It references what they do in the lives of their consumers. Implied in the tagline is the word your sheer driving pleasure.
Okay, 50 ways. Give me some more ideas if the small business owners out there
Okay,
watching.
fantastic. I'll give you a simple one. In fact, two back to back. One is make it 10 times better, and the next one along is make it 10 times worse. So the 10 times better
How does
one.
that work?
You look at, for example, how Sony and companies like that got caught in the video game war. And that's the 10 times better model. They're playing and creating games now that can take up to a decade to play. So it is incredibly complicated, incredibly rich. Then you get the opposite of that coming along, Angry Birds. It's the simplest thing you could possibly hope to create. It's stripped down to bare fundamentals, and it has been downloaded billions of times.
People love it.
So sometimes it's actually a case of taking what you do and decluttering it, making it much simpler, and I say making it worse.
Do you think this could help companies? Because we know in the past there have been those big giants, Kodak, Nokia, who became complacent, who became arrogant, who didn't see the trends. So because the market is moving, companies have to now respond. They can't get into that position again.
Absolutely. That's a dynamic I call ignoring it until it runs you over. And what typically tends to happen is that the marketing managers, the technology managers will see an emerging trend or technology in its infancy, when it's not very well developed and it's not representing itself well. They'll write it off as inferior to their own offering until it grows up in the background and runs them over. And it happens over and over again. So the idea here is, don't just sustain the excellence of what you do until you become invalid. And in fact, you actually need two different groups of people working within organizations. You need those who are optimizing the systems and keeping things running well, but running seemingly contradictory to them. You also have the innovators who are trying to shake things up. So you need the optimizers to keep it perfect until we dump it and do something else.
Final question. This seems to be driven by consumers. But what do you think of South African consumers? A lot of experts say we're not that sophisticated. We're not putting pressure on companies to respond to our needs. I had a cell phone company phone me and say, can we offer you this new package, which would have actually cost me more. So it seemed like they were reaching out, but it wasn't
And
thoughtful.
the irony of someone calling you on your cell phone and saying, would you like a cell phone contract? It seems bizarre, doesn't it? Well, there are certainly pockets of excellence in this country among the consumers and on the retail side. And I think by and large, we're not a very sophisticated market, but we're getting there extremely quickly. Elon Musk comes from South Africa, and he's arguably the world's leading innovator today. The minds are here. We just need to keep encouraging them.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Lovely.
This evening, that was Douglas Kruger, the author of Relentlessly Relevant. And I hope that you will find us relentlessly relevant. We continue with Primetime News shortly.